to Pop Shield, a long-form discussion podcast about musical topics both past and present. I'm Gabe, and I'm joined as always by Dan.
Hello.
And Darin.
Hello.
So we definitely have to apologize for our lengthy absence. The holidays kept us away for even longer than we had anticipated, but we are officially back to our regular bi-weekly schedule, and we're hoping this episode will help make it up to you. It's finally time for our 2019 recap. We're going to count down and undoubtedly argue about our personal top 5 albums of the year, but we're also going to discuss some honorable mentions, other end-of-the-year lists that are predictably riling people up, aka Pitchfork, and finally, we'll offer up some reflections on 2019 as a whole. I'm extremely curious to hear your guys' lists, so let's jump right in. Dan, what is your number 5 album of 2019?
Yeah, number 5 for me, I went with Swans, Leaving Meaning.
Okay, so I have this on my list a little bit later as well. I'm surprised it ended up on yours, but why?
Yeah, I'm a huge Swans fan, and I don't know if we've mentioned on the podcast, but we've talked personally. Like this album is a little bit of a disappointment for me. It seems it's a little bit of a step back from just the like monster of that previous trilogy with the Seer and to Glowing Man. This one sort of feels almost like a compilation of like Gerard's career as a whole. We're getting a lot of stuff that sounds like Angels of Light, his band in between when Swans was broken up and then before they got back together, and a lot of like sort of mid-period Swans like White Light from the Mouth of Infinity, and Amnesia is recorded again on this new record. But it was originally on Love of Life.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So when you say this, you mean like kind of their sort of like gothic country
Yeah,
vibe.
Exactly. So, we're kind of getting that. And so, it didn't have this like forward driving, sort of feel to it like the previous trilogy did. But I mean, that being said, I don't want to be all negative here. It is like a great, like all the songs are great. It's just sort of not like the greatest record as a whole. But I mean, there's some things in here, like the song "The Hanging Man" is just like peak Swans. That is like what you want. And I mean, Sunfucker, you can't not love a song called that. And I really love My Phantom Limb with like Gerard like talking sort of like two different channels, like sort of off kilter or whatever, from each other, like stuff like that is just so rad. And what you go to Swans for. So a little bit, I would have thought before I heard this record, it would have been a shoe-in for number 1 or 2. So it got demoted a little bit to number 5, but it's still a great record, I think.
I think this poses sort of an interesting philosophical question. I want to get your take on this, Darin, because basically, I will freely admit that I'm one of these, douchebags that had never listened to Swans until the Seer. Okay, I'll just admit it. And I think I'm not alone. There are really a lot of people. This was like a huge breakout moment for them, especially with the current generation. And so to me, Leaving Meaning sounds like completely new, like a complete sort of step forward. I think it's sort of a fascinating like refinement of their post-reunion kind of sound, because things are sort of like more focused, tighter. They are often like sustaining one idea rather than 30 minutes like cycling through and building up between many ideas. And there's also sort of like this new grace and like beauty and elegance to it. It's like a very pretty record, which is not something I ever thought I would describe Swans as. So my question is kind of, am I wrong to put it in my top 5 albums of the year, Darin? Because it's sort of just my ignorance, according to Dan. I just have to take his word for it, that I don't know that this is sort of a step backward. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And it's actually really like a really interesting way to think about things, because and I'm sure it's probably happened to me like dozens of times where like, you just happen to fall in love with a band or an album and you didn't even realize that they've been doing this for however long or whatever, so it sounds like brand new to you. I don't really blame you for it. Like I think it's it's kind of like how I come to things from the outside, things like Autek or whatever, you know what I mean? I might hear it for the first time and thinking that it's like groundbreaking when you guys are like, well, this is their thing. They've been doing this for albums, you know what I mean? So I think it's still cool.
Yeah, what do you think about my decision, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, you can't know everything about every, band. Like, this just happens to be what I would consider one of my favorite bands, so I know all of their records. I've listened to them all. I pretty much, know them very well. You can't do that with it. I'm sure there's some record I like that is just a ripoff of another record or something that I'm ignorant of that other record.
Right.
And so, sometimes you have to look at things in a vacuum, or in your case, not necessarily a vacuum, but just a small window of a career, especially a band like Swan. Filth, their first record came out in 1983, so
it's overwhelming.
It's not like you just didn't listen to two other records or something. You got a whole mess to catch up on.
Yeah, but it kind of made me think of like another 2019 phenomenon. I think it was 2019. Maybe it was even back into 2018. But Greta Van Fleet. Okay, you remember like all the debates about this, where it's like the people who like them have obviously never listened to Led Zeppelin before, and so you want to be like, you shouldn't like this. It's just a ripoff of something better or whatever. And I guess their fans would argue something like, I don't care. I don't feel the desire to go back and do this research. I just like what I'm hearing, even though it's like so, it sounds so much like Led Zeppelin. Have you listened to this, Darin? Greta Van Fleet?
I don't think I have, no.
Oh my God, you have to look it up. It's like uncanny how much it sounds like them.
It's like a bar band copying them.
Oh my God.
Yes. Yeah. But like the voice is perfect. It's just crazy. And so you know what I mean? Like, is that the territory I'm in? I guess it's not as big of an insult.
I don't think so, because if you've never heard Led Zeppelin before, it's like, have you ever been outside your house? I think there's a difference in not knowing like somewhat obscure no wave band, that made a gothic country set of records in the late '90s or something. I think there's quite a big difference, and even Greta Van Fleet, that's garbage. Like Leaving Meaning, it's like, it's not so much that like Gerard's like copying himself or something. Like, at least it's the same guy. It's just sort of like a culmination of his like entire career up until this point. Whereas I think like the previous records and previous records for most of their career have always like sort of like been moving on to a new thing. But he's older now. I think it's the appropriate time to do what he's doing.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe I will save just a few extra thoughts when I get around to this. But let's move on to your number 5, Darin.
So my number 5 was Helado, Negro.
Okay.
This Is How You Smile. So Pitchfork, I think, described this record, or I guess the music of this record, as like synth folk. And I think that's what kind of like immediately engaged me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It kind of immediately sort of like sucks you in and puts you almost like in a trance. You know what I mean? And he starts from like using like English lyrics to like Spanish lyrics and kind of like goes back and forth and stuff. And like the first time I heard it, I like couldn't turn it off. You know what I mean? It was just something that like I just kind of wanted to keep on hearing. And then like when the album ended, it felt like I wasn't even ready for it to end. So, that says a lot. Sometimes that kind of means like, well, what about the individual songs? And to me, this album was a little bit more one of those albums that you just sort of like didn't necessarily pay attention to like individual songs. Like there were definitely moments that stuck out, but as you like kind of go on, like it wasn't one of those ones where I'm like looking down at my phone or looking down to see like what song am I on. It's just kind of like, let it keep going. You know what I mean? It's just like one long drawn out piece, Yeah,
I love this record, and I find that it flies by like very, very fast somehow. It's a really interesting, sound because it's kind of like there are a lot of like synths and even drum machines and stuff, but it's like very minimal, and it does have sort of a folky like it makes me think of people like Devandre Banhart or like these kind of older like whispery indie folk of yore. But with like sort of an updated musical palette, but it still has kind of like a nice lo-fi edge, especially on his vocals. But I think like just every song, the hook is, it's almost like, it's weird because I feel like with a different production style, it would be like an absolutely slapping disco track, some of these songs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Really, really fascinating. I don't suppose you ever got around to this, Dan.
No, I actually, I didn't. But your description made me curious. I actually just saved it to my phone, so I'll listen to it.
It's I think definitely worth it. So I'll do my number 5. It is Panda Bear Buoys. Pretty divisive album, and by divisive I mean just everybody hates it for some reason, except for me.
You're the only one. Yeah.
And I don't know. I just feel like everybody must have listened to it once and just, gave up on it because the sound is so freaking weird. Like when I first listened to it, I just, it's like so arresting. I was like, what the hell is this? Because basically every song is like extremely skeletal, where it's just sort of like a strummed acoustic guitar with like delays on it, and then kind of like extremely booming low end, but just sometimes like peppered in throughout, maybe like some hi-hat in there too. And then his vocals are auto-tuned and kind of like pitched down throughout. And it basically sounds like, it almost sounds like demos or something. And maybe even sounds like, you must have had this experience, both of you guys, making music. Like sometimes you're just like playing around with effects and you find something like, a weird effect on your mixer, and you're not really going to use that, but it's just like fun to like sing through, playing around. And then you accidentally spend like 3 hours just kind of goofing around. You know what I mean? The record sounds like that. Like he was just playing around and just ended up in a day. I'm sure it wasn't really this way, but like over the course of a day, just sort of knocking out all these songs, just having fun with it. And it gives it this kind of like breezy, relaxed vibe. It makes me think of like floating in a pool or something. And my argument is that basically every track is such an earworm, and it's like these just beautiful little earworm pop songs combined with the strangest arrangement I've ever heard, makes it like the weirdest standout kind of gem that all year I couldn't forget about it. I couldn't really stop listening to it. Did you guys ever get around to checking this out?
I sort of did what you said at the beginning of you talked about it. It was one of those things like I listened to it once because you had said, that was pretty good. It didn't really hit me, and I completely forgot about it. And then this is the first time I'm remembering it because nobody has talked about it, like you said,
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to listen to it, but I definitely remember you like encouraging and talking about it. But yeah, I honestly had forgotten that this record existed.
I will say that your description did not sell me on it.
No,
it sounds like he's fucking around, and
it's just something
doesn't
like
really sell me.
If it wasn't Panda Bear, if it had no connection to Animal Collective, nobody knew who this was, it would be like one of those record collector gems that cost like $1,000 for a copy, because it's just like it would be like the strangest thing. Like, how did this come to exist? And
that makes
so
me
weird,
but more.
Like alluring, kind of. Yeah. So, and also it has the best lyric of 2019: "A slap on a jelly ass." So, can't really do better than that. All right, Dan, what's your number 4?
Yeah, number 4, I got Danny Brown. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Danny Brown, I love him. I think he's one of the best rappers around. But all of his records, like up until this point, like have always suffered from that little bit too long kind of syndrome that plagues rap music, especially I thought Old, like I really love a lot of songs on Old, but there's a lot of like kind of throwaway things like that record could be much shorter, and so everything's always sort of like had that problem that like just a little thing that keeps it from being like a classic or something. Whereas this record, 33 minutes, it's all killer, no filler, and the producing is great. Q-Tip is the executive producer. He actually produces 3 tracks on the record. Even some people I don't particularly care for. Flying Lotus, he produces a track. I thought it was great. JPEG Mafia, I'm not a big fan. Loved his track. Even loved his vocals, which coincidentally are on the Flying Lotus track. I just think like this was a great rap record. It's just fun from top to bottom. Even all the guest spots are all good, even though it's you don't have huge names here. Run the Jewels, JPEG Mafia, Blood Orange, people I'm not huge fans of, but I thought they all like held their own here. Just a real fun, great record.
I really love it. It's weird that it feels like the stakes are so low for the first time, because he kind of became known for these like big conceptual kind of albums. You think about like Triple X or something, it kind of like, it gets like more somber and darker as it goes along. His voice
and
changes
does
from like the
opposite,
high, to the low, and then Old does like the flip side, which makes it really tragic because it feels like he's learned something, but then descends back into his partying ways or something. And Atrocity Exhibition is like kind of like a dark, harrowing experience throughout. This is the first time where it just feels like he's just kind of having fun and like ripping rhymes on some, like cool beats and stuff.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I get why that disappoints some people. But I kind of agree with you that just every track, it's all killer, no filler. Every track
I don't need
awesome.
another, like when you start getting into that, if it's another concept record, then it becomes, like, oh, okay, what is it going to be this time? It becomes stale, I don't.
Yeah.
I'm glad he didn't trap himself in that box. I'm glad we just got the fun Danny Brown. Like this record's sort of like, his first album before Triple X, The Hybrid, from 2010, like it's sort of like this record in the sense that I don't think there's like a grand concept. It's sort of just like fun, but it's a little, he hasn't found his footing. He's not like the greatest rapper yet. There's some like missteps here, and I feel like this is like an updated, like better version of that record.
Yeah. All right. What's your number 4, Darin?
I wonder how much shit I'm going to get for this.
Oh, boy.
Lana Del Rey, Norman fucking Rockwell.
All right.
I don't hate it.
Okay. So, I was listening to Lana Del Rey, like, with Born to Die back in, like, 2012 or whatever. And, she sort of, like, I was interested in a few of those songs. I think it was, like, Video Games and, like, Blue Jeans or something like that. It was a couple songs, right? The album itself, I don't even really remember much, but those songs came to mind. But and then I never really listened to her again after that. I don't even know what was happening in between. And obviously, this record, made it very high on a particular list that we're going to talk about.
Right.
So it drew my attention, obviously, and I kind of like never could put it down. Like I just sort of like really enjoyed it. I feel like she sort of finally, I don't know, became interesting because previously those first 2 songs, that was about it. Like every other song just felt very like the same, kind of like this.
Yeah, I felt the same
slow, swooning, like cinematic, like I'm watching a 1950s, noir movie or something like that. Whatever. Like,
yeah.
And so that theme still is here. I mean, it hasn't like changed, it hasn't like transformed necessarily, but I do feel like the songs are a little more fleshed out. I find her willingness to just, I don't know, say the word fuck so many times, like, pretty interesting overall. And it kept me interested. Yeah. The record itself kept me interested pretty much the entire time.
I mean, there are a lot of moves like that where it feels like she's not really like trying to be a pop star anymore, and by doing that, she's actually succeeding in a way that she never did before. Because she had like kind of this smart irony to her,
right?
But she would like very happily take a top 10 hit. Like all of her songs were designed to still be that.
But like I felt like people didn't know her. Like I ask, your average like coworker or something like that, and I'm like, yeah,
I don't know.
Lana Del Rey, right? And they're like, huh? Who? And I mean,
they would definitely know like that Summertime Sadness song.
It's gotta be, right? Yeah.
I mean, they would probably know it, but it always just felt like she was like trying to be cool, but also, have it both ways, sort of. And this one, it was like she's like, I'm just gonna be, I don't know, I'm gonna be like a 70, like it was more like a Joni Mitchell vibe than a sustained mood or something, more than like, I'm going to try to get a couple hit singles out of this thing. And, there's stuff like, the swearing is like, feels less compromising. The fact that the third track is like a 10-minute like jam is insane. The thing is actually like a very long record. I mean, I agree that it's like sort of it's her delivering on like the promise that her early singles always had. I do find like it gets really taxing because the Sublime cover is admittedly awesome, but it rocks. It totally rocks. But it's like fun and upbeat. And other than that, it's an hour of just ballads. Like literally. I mean, I am pretty much incapable, even though I actually think every song is great, I'm pretty much incapable of listening to the whole thing all the way through. You know what I mean, Darin?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was definitely... It was not easy, putting it on and getting all the way to the end every time, largely because it's just so long. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It's definitely exhausting. But I would find myself like coming back to different portions of the record. Never really felt like I needed to start over because I kind of learned early on, like starting over, I never would get to the end. You know what I mean? I'd spend so much time like on the first half of the record, which I liked a lot, but I didn't know the second half enough. And I came to like really love the song "The Next Best American Record," like which is like kind of towards the end and everything. So I feel like it's not necessarily an album that like you have to take in all in one sitting. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think you do at all. You have any thoughts on this album, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, predictably, I don't love it. I think like everything you guys sort of said is right, but I feel like you guys are being too nice about it. Like, yeah, this is like not a record I want to listen to the whole record at all. It's I don't remember how many tracks it is, but it's like 10 ballads and one Sublime cover. Like, no, thank you. Sublime is maybe the worst band of all time, and you can't make their songs better. And then, yeah, just all the ballads. I don't want to hear a ballad and then a ballad and then a ballad and then a ballad and then a ballad. It's just like it's soul crushing to finish this record. It's like all the songs like on their own are like fine. If somebody played it for me, I'd be like, oh yeah, that was fine. But again, I wouldn't be like, oh man, I got to hear the rest of the other 12 ballads on there. I don't get the hype for it. I've never really been a fan of her. I don't get the hype around her in general. Do not dig this record.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really disagree. I think she's still having a little bit of like I want these songs to get a lot of streams and end up on playlists and stuff, so the record isn't trying so hard to work cohesively, and it's like too long on purpose because every successful record has to be too long now to get a bunch of streams. But I do just think that it's like there's not a bad song here, and they're actually at least like there's like 14, and at least like 9 or 10 of them are like excellent songs, including the Sublime cover. Thank you very much. Okay, my number 4 is kind of an obscure one, Dax Pierson Live in Oakland. I don't know if either of you guys have heard of this.
I have not.
Nope.
So it's a pretty fascinating record. It's basically it's 2 live sets by this guy named Dax Pierson, and this is where I start to question my normal rule about not letting like identity and context and stuff like that influence me too much. Which Pitchfork obviously takes the opposite track on that issue, but it's basically like a guy who in 2005 he got in a car accident and he's like paralyzed from the chest down now, and he makes like electronic kind of experimental music, and he's sort of like developed his own interfaces and equipment and stuff that will allow him to sort of like improvise and actually perform. And it has this very kind of fascinating sound in that respect that it gives me like an Autechre vibe of like, I can't even understand how he's doing this or how he's like making this. And it makes it like very fascinating to me. Musically, it's also just awesome. I think it's like really kind of like thudding, like lumbering beats and stuff like that with like quite like harsh sort of synthesizers, like sort of darting all over the place and everything. And yet I will say in my defense that it's also a theme of the record where he'll like samples himself saying something like, don't take your physical abilities for granted, for you could lose them in the snap of a neck. And there's another track that's like composed of sampled sounds of like his doctor talking to him and his like wheelchair and other like medical equipment that he uses every day.
Sounds like a HIPAA violation.
Yeah, it might be. On himself.
Yeah.
But so it's very much at the forefront, like his sort of disability, and yeah, I think the music really delivers. The other thing though that I think really takes us to the next level is he's from like the Oakland music scene. Do you guys remember the Ghost Ship Warehouse fire?
Yeah.
You, Darin?
No.
So there was basically like an experimental music venue in Oakland that was like people were living in it and they were holding shows there, and it like didn't have any permits or anything like that. And it eventually caught fire. I think like everything was sort of, linked together by a ton of extension cords and stuff like that. And it was like a huge tragedy. Like a bunch of people died and stuff. And it's sort of like near and dear to my heart because I feel like I played in so many venues like this. You know what I mean? Like I can totally imagine just the entire thing being rigged together with extension cords and, kind of pretending like when the fire marshal comes that nobody actually lives there and stuff like that. Just so you can like put on music. And anyway, the cool thing about this record is it's 2 live sets. They're both like 20 minutes ish. And the first one is from like 2014 before the fire. And the other one is from 2018 after the fire. And it's like quite haunting because you hear people clap and it's clearly like a small room. And, I think the review in The Wire sort of mentions this, but it's like, you have to imagine that maybe some of the claps you're hearing like actually died in the fire, since this is the same scene where these same circles are in. And so basically like between his disability and this fire, it just feels like there's so much tragedy weighing on this record that I don't know. I guess I just feel conflicted. We always talk about this, like how much should you weigh that stuff? Should the music have to stand completely on its own? But can I be off the hook a little bit since it's so clearly, deliberately part of the record?
Yeah, I mean, especially when it's a part of the record, I think it's fine. Like, I love like Vic Chestnut, who has sort of a similar story. He was he was paralyzed, and he sings a lot about that, like in his songs. And it becomes a part of it. What I don't like, and I think what you're talking about, is like when Pitchfork shoehorns it in, or what was that one album we listened to, and it just was literally like a Michelle Obama speech, like tacked in the middle of it, and they try to act like it was some big political thing, like stuff like that. I don't like. Yeah. But when it's a part of the, I mean, maybe you're doing it a little bit with the people clapping could have died, but I'll allow it.
Jeez.
I don't know. I just like, I can't stop thinking about it, but I do feel like it's a little, I think it breaks my rules a little bit because I think musically the record is awesome and it would be like in my top 10 of the year, top 15 of the year without any of this. But like with this stuff that I can't stop thinking about while I'm listening to it, it just vaults it up because it makes it like a conceptual art piece, like beyond just a record. But okay. Number 3 for you, Dan, is?
Yeah, number 3 for me, I got Sunn with Life Metal. This is their first record of their own in quite a while, since Canon in 2015, which was a bit of a disappointing sort of record. It's real short, not that great. And so really, this is the first one that's been awesome since Monoliths and Dimensions, which I believe is 2009. So, it's just great to have them back. This is a band, if you're listening to a Sunn record, you know what it's going to sound like. You're getting crushing, massive guitars, distortion. This is just for somebody who wants to hear what a billion amps sound like together, and just sustaining a note for however long. And I love when they do things like they do on this record. It's just each song's just a side of vinyl. We got 4 tracks here. We got 2 discs. You're in for the haul. And I just love this, like, it's one of those things you just can get lost in. You put on your nicest pair of headphones, lay down, close your eye, and you can just swim in all this, distortion and guitars, and there's other things in it. Someone plays like a Moog.
I wanted to ask, actually, is that sort of new for them? There's like cello, there's some vocals and stuff.
No, they're like when I saw them live, there was like a guy playing a synthesizer like with them, and that was 4 or 5 years ago, and they've had vocals on other things. Usually it's the guy who's on the Mayhem's first record. I can't think of his name off the top of my head. But it's not incredibly new. In fact, like I don't think anything on this record, or really anything Sunn does very often, is new. It's just
it felt like it was a little brighter. Like it wasn't so like dark and crushing. It was like kind of heavenly feeling.
No, I mean with the title, which is like a joke, on death metal, life metal. It's so, but it like. it being a joke, it sort of still makes sense. You know, it does sort of have that sound. And I mean, this was this and the like companion record Pyroclast were recorded by Steve Albini, and I mean, he's just a great producer. I think he worked like really well with like this type of thing. You know, this is the best sounding Sunn record, like, you know, production wise and everything. Just a great record, both of them.
Yeah, I think they're both really brilliant, even though they didn't quite make my list. Darin, what was your number 3?
My number 3 was Angel Olsen's All Mirrors.
Okay. All right. How come?
So I remember when the album came out, and I think, Dan, you had sort of like, you weren't really too hyped about it. And so that kind of made me like not all that interested, but I ended up checking it out anyway. And I think it was you, Gabe, that actually said you felt like it was a little bit more of a return to like kind of her original sort of like style, you know, like kind of having her vocals sort of buried and sort of like, you know,
after that
country.
What was the previous one? I can't remember what it was called, but
My Woman.
My Woman. Yeah, that was so like, you know, her vocals were so clear and upfront. And
I remember. I think we reviewed it on the old podcast, didn't we? Or at least I remember talking about it. But yeah. This one, I mean, Dan, I'm really interested to kind of know like why you don't like it. But I feel like it's an expansion of like kind of her original sound, sort of what I was really wanting from on My Woman, and I felt so like disappointed when it just wasn't that. Are you still feel that way?
Yeah, I sort of do. I was like I mean, I still am a big fan of hers. Like since she, you know, first came out, I like to this day, I would say it's like a favorite record of mine, Strange Cacti. And, you know, everything since then has just sort of been like not quite as good as that, but, you know, I've liked all the records. But this one, it just sort of seemed like, I don't know, it was a little bit of a return to form, like Gabe said, with the vocals being buried, which is like something I really love about like Strange Cacti. It had like that record like has this like sort of ethereal, sort of like Francois Hardy like sort of sound to it. Yeah. And I feel like, yeah, the vocals like sort of do that here, but it's like with this production that's better, you know, higher. You know, you just got more money behind her and all. You know, I complain about that constantly, but it just sort of was like a souped up version of like her original sort of lo-fi thing. And, you know, I don't want somebody to just keep making the same record over and over, but I don't know. This one just like I wasn't the biggest fan of My Woman. Like, it's a good record. I listen to it every now and then, you know, but it's not like a favorite of mine. And you know, this one just sort of like was another disappointment and sort of more of a disappointment. So it's maybe better than I'm giving it credit for. And honestly, I haven't listened to it since like the month it came out. So maybe I should give it another spin. But
I weirdly like was really enjoying it when it came out, and then found myself not returning to it very much because it feels like very heavy and dramatic. There's like huge string accompaniment.
Very dramatic. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I think the production is like awesome, but it's sort of like produced like a classical record or something where there's huge dynamic range. You know what I mean? Like it gets so quiet and soft, and then will like just swell so loud with the strings and everything. And it makes it like a record that I can't like put on, you know, I can't like put it on in the car while I'm driving with somebody. You know, it's like a kind of thing where I got to sit down and listen through the whole thing. And it just prevented me from spending much time with it. That didn't give you any hang up, Darin?
It did. I mean, certainly, like it's not a great record to put on speakers, really. Like you kind of have to have headphones on to enjoy it. Now, the songs like What It Is one in particular that kind of like has a beat to it. It actually reminds me of one of her earliest singles, High Five, one of the first songs I remember like listening from her. But yeah, like especially the Lark, like the first song, it's like so quiet, it's like hard to like be able to like listen and pay attention to if you don't have headphones on. But I mean, I feel like there's like a lot of like really great flourishes like pretty much after that I mean, who cares if I can't listen to it like in the car or whatever? Like I'm okay with like listening to it on headphones. I don't know. I enjoyed it, and I kind of continue to enjoy it. And I feel like it's just an it's really the natural progression that I kind of like thought would be the direction she would take. I mean, obviously you might want somebody to go more lo-fi, but that's just not what happens when somebody gets famous and makes more money, like you said, Dan. So if anything, I would accept this over like what My Woman was. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, actually, I guess I don't know the story exactly right, and I'll probably fuck it up, but she was like working on these songs in like a very lo-fi, like solo guitar kind of intimate way, and decided to create these arrangements, but liked both of them so much that sometime this year she's going to be releasing like the original version of the album.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, you had told me that. I hope that still comes true, because I would really like to hear that version.
Yeah, I'm actually very interested to check that out. My number 3 is Swans, Leaving Meaning.
Nice.
I said some of my piece, but I guess I just want to add that for me, I've always thought of, I love Swans, but I've always thought of listening to them as work, and this is the first one that I really was just compulsively listening to it. I think it's like I said, it just sounds like gorgeous, but it's just much more focused. It's at like a very taut hour and a half instead of 2 hours. And to me, it's just like a pleasure to listen to. The other thing I just to avoid emails, I just want to mention, yes, Swans was canceled this year, weirdly, I think.
I think that was 2018, actually.
Yeah, I guess, but
or maybe even 17. It was a while ago.
Yeah, it raises some. Well, this year it was like when I really felt it, because all of these best of the decade lists, like Swans isn't appearing on any of them, which is crazy, because everybody loved the Seer and To Be Kind. But I just feel like it's such a 2019 problem where it's like I love this record and yet it's become like almost political to put it on your list or something. Obviously, I don't know. There's all there's allegations of rape against Michael Gira. His like big supporters claim that they're not credible allegations. It goes back and forth. I just like find myself just not really giving a shit. It's just like music to me, and I don't. We've talked about it before. I don't really listen to music like investing in the personality unless it's Dax Pierson, like I mentioned.
Yeah,
but I try not to like invest in the person's like real life or whatever. I did have this thought though. Tell me what you think about this. Like, how people want to make an argument, like if you eat meat or something, you are like complicit in climate change. You know what I mean? Which I'm not sure if I agree, but there's like a conversation to be had there. And the same conversation happens like if you listen to Swans, you're complicit in like rape culture or something like that. They would say that you're supporting like, whatever rapists or abusers and stuff like that. You shouldn't be doing that. But the thing is, nobody would try to argue that like meat isn't fucking delicious. You know what I mean? That's a different claim. So I was thinking, what if somebody had the balls to give like this Swans record like a 9 out of 10, but don't listen to it? Wouldn't that, like, I would kind of respect somebody who did that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. I don't. So
it's like saying meat is really good, but you shouldn't eat it.
That's right. Because that's what you have to say that. You know what I mean? We all like meat. I mean, is delicious, but it's bad.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I agree with that. Like, I eat meat. You probably shouldn't, but it's delicious, so I do.
I just feel like this would be a nice compromise, because you'd be like, because it like next year, probably somebody's going to review Thriller or something, and they're going to act like it's a 6 out of 10. You know what I mean? But you should be able to say it's a 10 out of 10, but don't listen to it. You know what I mean? I feel like that's more consistent.
Or listen to it on something, just torrent it, and then they don't make any money. So.
Yeah, that's also a little, I don't know. Okay, we are on to our number 2s. Dan, what is your number 2?
All right, well, after that, number 2 for me, Purple Mountains, self-titled Purple Mountains.
Wow.
This is a record I like. It was sort of a blunder for me. I had never gotten super into Silver Jews or Purple Mountains, which for people who don't know are both fronted by David Berman. It was somebody like I had heard some Silver Jews records. I liked them. It just never got like super into them. But this record was catching some buzz, and I had it saved to my phone, and I wanted to get around to it. And then he killed himself, and everybody's talking about it, and I thought, damn, I gotta hear this. You gotta listen to it. And just like from the first listen, like instantly, like loved it and was like angry at myself for not listening to it to the day it came out. These are like these like sort of like sarcastic like folk songs. Like just the lyrics are so great. Like I mean, especially not to do what you did with that other record, but like bring in his suicide into it. Like I mean, I'm sure they were good songs before that, but then when you have that looming over this record, like he killed himself like the night before they were supposed to go on tour. If I remember correctly. Take a little Ian Curtis, chip. But these are just some great like folk songs. Like I love Margaritas at the Mall. It's just like the catchiest. Yeah, it's like the catchiest, but like so many things on this record. The problem with a lot of sort of like sad like things. It's just like so depressing to listen to. It just brings you down. But these like many of the songs here are sort of cheerful, but then like he's not singing anything cheerful like whatsoever. And I think like whenever you can do that, that's just like that's like great songwriter to me. Like when you can take something that's like you can take like one emotion and make it a completely different one. And just I absolutely like love this record.
Yeah, I love it too, and it's such a weird thing because I was listening to it when it came out and I thought it was great and I thought it was so funny. Like it's very self-deprecating and like kind of like just hilarious, like it's hard to even explain. He just says something like, what is it? Yes, I've been whatever, something by the void. Much of my faith has been destroyed. And it's just delivered with like this kind of funny, I don't know. I just thought it was such a funny record.
It's like I said, like he's saying like something that's like really depressing, but he says it in like a sarcastic, funny sort of way.
But then he actually commits suicide, and it's like the lyrics are so dark, like all of a sudden it like totally changed meaning. I think with a little distance, because I was kind of listening to it like over the past couple of weeks. I was finding that it was like easier to listen to than right after he committed suicide. But so I think it will sort of maybe develop that funniness again, but like never in totally the same way. I mean, I don't know, like an amazing record and just one that's like was just radically transformed by events. Did you get around to checking this out, Darin?
I did not. Sounds like I should have though.
It's too late to have fun listening to it. But yeah, a fantastic record. Darin, what is your number 2?
So my number 2 is Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Ghosteen.
Wow.
That shocks me.
Amazed. I am amazed. All right. It's also on my list. I assume it's on yours, Dan?
Yeah.
All right. So we can have the convo now.
So, I figured this would surprise you guys, but I remember when you had been talking about it and I sort of checked it out at that point, but then just kind of skipped out and then came back to it later. But I mean, I'm sure you guys have a lot to say about it as well, but like this album sort of like just kind of grabbed me like immediately and sort of never let go. It's obviously it's an incredibly like dark record, like very harrowing, like and obviously knowing the story of like his son and all this stuff outside of it, just it obviously kind of reminded me a bit of like Mount Erie's A Crow Looked at Me, right? But the like I don't know what it is, but like Mount Erie, like I didn't want to listen to that record again, like after having heard it, you know what I mean? Right. And maybe it's because like the lyrics are just so plain and so like explicit, like exactly the exact emotions that he's trying to say, whereas like Nick Cave is a little more poetic, I feel like, about it, you know what I mean? Like the music's more interesting, and there's it's I don't want to say theatrical, but it's like a movie, almost like a film kind of playing out, like he's telling a story, especially the last track and everything. Right. It just and I don't want to say that it's like entertaining, but like it's a record that I feel like I could I don't know, it's like reading a good book and like wanting to come back and read that book again, or a favorite film, like wanting to see that again. Like I never described A Crow Looked at Me like that because it was just so sad and depressing and so raw, I guess.
Well, I feel like it's very helpful that, you know, like with Mount Eerie, he's just sort of like confronting his grief, like in the most direct way possible.
Right.
And this is like Nick Cave kind of looking for peace. And it's, you know, it's unclear really if he totally finds it. It feels to me like the darkness kind of slips in here and there in quite devastating fashion at points. But because he's sort of like searching for this peace or like searching for something to believe in or something, the music kind of takes on a pretty serene and like sort of elegiac quality. You know what I mean? That makes it not so crushing. It makes it like actually quite beautiful and peaceful, you know? It makes you feel like you're, at some points, like you're in the album cover, you know? Which is like almost absurdly, like exaggeratedly peaceful, I think on purpose. But you know what I mean, Dan? Like how it's not so difficult because it's actually very beautiful.
No, exactly. I mean, what Darin said is kind of exactly what I was thinking. Like, you know, I compared this to Mount Eerie, which when we reviewed that on the old podcast, I said like it was a great record. I never want to hear it again in my life. You know, because like you said, Darin, it just was like in your face, like, you know, my wife died, you know, like that's what the album's about. Whereas like here, I think like if you didn't know that Nick Cave's like son had died, you could maybe, I mean, you know, it'd still sound like a sad, you know, record, but it wouldn't be maybe as like personally, you know, like devastating. Like whereas like Mount Eerie, there's no hiding in it, you know, like you said, Darin, Nick Cave is a little bit more poetic, you know, things are like sort of drenched in you know, metaphor or whatever, and yeah, the music is just so much more interesting. Like this does not sound like really any Bad Seeds record that precedes it. You know, there's barely any, if any, percussion, you know, on it. It's like very like ethereal and like sort of synth heavy. It's just like it's this like great end cap to this trilogy, you know, Skeleton Tree and Push the Sky Away, and then this record. It's just like a monster. I mean, like Darin said too, you know, just from the first time I listened to this, you know, I'm a huge Nick Cave fan. I love him. I knew I was probably going to like this record, but this is one of those records, and this is like a thing that doesn't happen like too often. Like when I listen to it the first time, I like immediately know this is a great record. I'm gonna love this record for a long time, you know. And this like definitely did that to me. I mean, I think this has been number one on my list since whatever day it came out, October 4th, 2019. You know, so like since I first heard it, you know, I sort of like knew that this was gonna be number one. I mean, just absolutely fantastic. And at first, like when I hadn't heard the record yet, I thought it was weird how he's like splitting it into these two discs and stuff. You know, I think I joked about the, you know, just trying to double the sales, you know, being a double record, but it's like really split in sort of a nice way, and something that's kind of lost with streaming. Like the first half is sort of like from, you know, one perspective, and the second half is sort of like from his perspective. And, you know, like those last three songs are just like real, you know, heavy. I mean, Hollywood ending with that like fable or whatever, you know, about Kisa having this baby that dies and stuff, and you know, going to the villagers and you know, learning that everyone knows somebody, you know, has had somebody die in their lives and everything. It's just, you know, with Nick Cave doing this like falsetto, you know, singing that I don't recall him ever doing before. Just, you know, this is just a fantastic record.
It's definitely the sort of record I think that, like, if you experienced, you know, a close relative or somebody like passing, that like it would be a record that I feel like would help you get through that. You know what I mean? Whereas like Mount Eerie, I would only feel like I was just being reminded of
it's like dwelling.
Horrible.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would quite confidently say that if his son didn't die or anything, I would still give this like a 10 out of 10 because it's just
for sure.
It's just an absolutely magnificent record. And, you know, I had the weirdest experience. You know, you said like you put it on, Dan, and you immediately were like bowled over by it. it was weird for me because it was like the first time I listened to it, I was like, I didn't even feel like it was music. Like it felt more like an audiobook or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the hell? Like, this is just like spoken word over like drifting ambient, backgrounds. And it was weird because as I continued listening, like the songs started to reveal themselves. I think it's sort of brilliant how every song has like a little thing that you can latch onto at first. It'll be like, whether it'll be some like little synth line or like, these kind of like bell sounds, just there's always like some little hook or something like that. And it sort of like guides you into, it helps you like get into the lyrics and like the dense, sort of like ambient structures and stuff. And it just helps you realize that these are like very well-crafted songs, and they are, I don't know, just absolutely so listenable. And the way that it's divided into 2 discs is brilliant, like you said, because it also helps make it digestible, because each song is like very distinct, and there's only 8 on the first disc, and there's only 3 on the next disc, and it's like just very easy to remember which song is which and like sort of parse it out that way. It's just like it's just not overwhelming at all. It's really like, I feel like he's, in a musical way, like sort of literally taking your hand and just like guiding you into this. And it makes it like extremely listenable. It makes it just that much more, amazing as just a musical thing. And I do think the arrangements are absolutely fascinating, but then, and then it's like the almost the cherry on top is like the really devastating emotionality to it. And like, there are parts that are really, like the whole Kisa thing you mentioned is like, I mean, just jaw dropping. Like I remember I was listening to my girlfriend is a bit of a softie, and I was listening to like this album and had told her a little bit about it. And I'm listening to like Waiting for You. And she like walks up in tears and she's like, wait a minute, is he waiting for his son to come back? And I was like, yes, I think so. And she's like just crying. It's brutal, but absolutely beautiful. Anything more to say about Ghosteen?
I mean, I just think it's like masterful. You know what I mean? Like, I think some of the best records that we have always talked about kind of deal with like the ending of a relationship. You know what I mean? Like somebody being heartbroken, right? And we don't get I don't feel like there's as many albums out there that, somebody takes the subject of like death and is able to just create something, just like a magnificent piece of art from it. You know what I mean? Like you would almost think that like you would just become discouraged, like talking about it or even like trying to, come to grips with it. But instead he creates like brilliance. Basically it's like I'm obviously not really nearly as talented or not talented at all, but like there's no way I feel like I could do something like this. You know what I mean? Like to put all of that energy into something and release it to the world is, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And I think he talked a little bit about, feeling like how, like he basically like couldn't write for a while. And he was sort of saying like, just how you feel like, oh, I didn't do this topic justice, or like I didn't capture this right. And he said that sort of like involuntarily, like lines and musical motifs and stuff just started like coming to him, and it sort of like happened very organically like that. But it is amazing. Like, you just can't think of a greater encapsulation of tragedy. I get that I would feel like it's impossible to do, and it's incredible that he pulled it off. Okay, so I guess in a moment, that was your number 2, Darin. I guess in a moment it'll be clear, everybody else's list. But my number 2 is a $75 bill. I Was Real. Anybody check this out?
Yeah, I did. That one actually almost made my, it sort of bounced from 5 to 6 and ended up on 6.
Yeah, this is kind of like it's just so like, it's like made for me. It's like I want it just injected directly into my veins, It's sort of like this West African like desert blues jams mixed with like, New York minimalism, like Tony Conrad and stuff with like these droning strings. There's like a lot of like John Cale style. Some of the jams get like so raw sort of that they sound sort of like White Light, White Heat by Velvet Underground. It's like it's just so fucking cool. And then like the percussion, it's like hand percussion, but it's made on like sort of, he like makes these boxes and things like that. It's just like, I don't know. It's just the kind of thing like on paper, I'm like, that's going to be my favorite thing ever. And then it somehow exceeds my expectations. It's just incredible. Absolutely fucking slaps. I mean, every just like jam is just like banging. And some of the tracks are like in, you know, have like 21 beats to a measure and stuff. And they still fucking slap. I can't believe it. But, you know, it's a little bit like, you know, it makes you think of like the most hip, like guys that, you know, I don't know, work at a record store or something, you know, and like just borrow bits and pieces from the coolest shit that they love. And I'm here for it. And I also, you know, not to get too political, but I feel like it was sort of a tragedy this decade that like appropriation, you know, quote unquote, became taboo. Because, you know, you think about like how fun it used to be, like how a lot of our favorite artists, like in the early 2000s, you know what I mean? They were just like freely borrowing from everything. And it was like not uncommon to hear like, oh, you know, like this band like combines tribal drums with like, you know, Indian raga with, you know, whatever, blues. And you know what I mean? Like there was sort of like a freewheeling spirit to that. And it became like a little bit uncool. And I just love that these are like guys that, you know, they live in New York and they just are like, you know, why not? Why shouldn't we like search outside of the music we've always known and like find interesting? Because there's like there's like Middle Eastern vibes to this. There's like sort of raga vibes. I mean, it's just like, you know what I mean? Like it's inspiring. Don't you kind of miss that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, this record, like I think what you said is a good description of it. Like it sounds like some cool guys, sort of like us, that you know, spend too much time listening to music that nobody else really listens to or cares much about, and borrowing pieces from that, and you know, making a band from it. It's just like an absolutely like great record to just throw on. You know, like it's strange it being like so sort of like you know, borrowing from these like sort of unpopular sorts of music for being that it's like very like listenable, and you know, like you could put it on in the car, you know, and I have and everything. It is funny, like their band name is awful, $75 bill. Like in fact, like you had listened to this and you told me to listen to it because you thought I'd like it. And you know, I saved it in my phone, and I really like 100% thought it was gonna be like you know, some like backpacker rap or something. And I was like, I really like sort of put it off for a minute because I didn't want to listen to like I wasn't ever in the mood for like a rapper I didn't already know. And then, you know, I finally was like, oh, I got to get to that. I listened to it and I was like, oh, it's like the opposite of that. Yeah. And you know, really enjoyed it. And like I said, you know, it sort of like bounced around in my list when I was making this. Like it would be number 6 if we made a top 10, I think.
Yeah. Are you with me on this, Darin? Like, I'm hoping that in the 2020s it becomes like okay to just borrow from other cultures again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was some of the most fun that you would have with like music, like hearing totally, you know, like just having that freedom and not having to feel like you have to be so PC about everything, you know what I mean? And like careful about what you do and how you use things, you know what I mean? Like when we were way back in the day, like making music and stuff, like it never mattered, right? It was just like, what's the weirdest, coolest thing that we could like come up with and like just throw it on there, you know? But
yeah, and we were listening to stuff, you know, because like I think the 2000s really started this trend that I think $75 bill is like born from, which is like, you know, like these reissue series of like obscure African music and stuff, you know, like that became like so cool at that time. And everybody was listening to like this really obscure shit that would get like a cool reissue or compilation, and you would be like, damn, like I fucking, you know, I'm so fascinated by, I've never even heard of this country, you know, and now I'm listening to like music from the late 60s from this country or whatever, and we, you know, we would get inspired by it, and it's like, I don't know, I just think that's, I'm just like, I'm proud of these guys that they just went for it and did it, you know, it's just fucking badass to me. Okay, so that was my number 2. Dan, I guess we know your number 1 then. It is. Thank
you, Darin, for taking the sails out, or the wind out of my sails. But Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds with Ghosteen.
And that is actually my number 1 as well. I'm wondering, Darin, what album is more meaningful and impactful and moving? And Ghosteen.
God, now I'm starting to like regret the choice I may have made. I'm gonna give you guys a guess though. I'm curious.
Did Weezer release anything this year? Or last year?
I have a strong feeling it's Vampire Weekend.
And you would be you would be correct. I'm just that easy to predict,
wow.
I guess. Yeah, so Vampire Weekend, Father of the Bride. You guys know I'm a big Vampire Weekend stan, basically. Not that they've ever really released anything that was like totally terrible, but this record, just like every other Vampire Weekend record, I just kind of like wear out just listening over and over again. Admittedly, this is like a double album, so it is extra long, and there are certainly songs that are not as good as most of the others. But I would argue that like the majority of the songs are right on par with most of Vampire Weekend's catalog. In fact, like the last 5 or 6 songs are like, I just kind of played them over and over and over again. I just like absolutely love them. I love having like Ezra like singing with the girl from Haim or whatever. I think that was like really, really cool. Honestly, I wish like almost the entire album had that, because like the songs that she was on are just like the biggest highlights for me. But Stranger, Spring Snow, and then the last song, Jerusalem, New York, Berlin, just I feel like magnificent songs. Like he's just a really great songwriter, you know what I mean? And it's kind of weird talking about this after like kind of like pouring out, gushing over Nick Cave and right. Giving him so much credit for like taking such a like heavy subject and creating something masterful for it. And then this album is just sort of, just on the much lighter side of things, but still a record that I played more than anything else in 2019 for sure.
Yeah, I've been like a huge Vampire Weekend fan until now, and then for some reason I've been unable to like get into this record, and I have yet to even make it to the end of the record, like that stretch that you're mentioning. Wow. I get like a little bored as I go through. I find the production really strange. It's like very, you know what I mean? It's like very clean and bright. It sounds like almost like 80s-ish, like makes me think of like 80s Paul Simon, which Paul Simon is like obviously the god of Vampire Weekend, but it's like, I don't know, it was like a little off-putting at first, but I find that every once in a while I think, you know what, I should give that another shot, and it's like I make it one more song through, and it's like I enjoy myself and then get like bored. So, by like 2025, I'm going to get all the way through it, and I'm going to probably really like the whole thing.
No, we're going to do a Vampire Weekend podcast. Okay. We already promised the people that, so.
We did. So I'll be forced to get into this, but it's like, I have a strong feeling I'm going to eventually like it, but for some reason I've had like a hell of a time doing it. But all right, that is our top fives of the year. I want to talk about some honorable mentions and stuff, but I'm wondering if they'll just kind of come up organically if we discuss some other lists. First, naturally, I think we should discuss Pitchfork's always controversial list. Darin, could you read their top 10 albums of 2019?
Yes, so we have number 10, Purple Mountains with a self-titled album. Number 9, Weiss Blood with Titanic Rising. Number 8, Finesse with Agora. Number 7, Helado Negro with This Is How You Smile. Number 6, Bad Bunny with X100 Pre. Number 5, Solange with When I Get Home. Number 4, Angel Olsen with All Mirrors. Number 3, Big Thief with UFOF. Number 2, FKA Twigs with Magdalene. And coming in at number 1, Lana Del Rey with Norman fucking Rockwell.
Really emphasize that fucking. So we got a chance to actually talk about a handful of these in our own list, but are there any others, maybe even throughout the whole list, that you think we should mention?
I did like that Finesse record, and honestly was a little surprised that it was so high in Pitchfork's list. They normally have a token, electronic ambient thing a bit higher up, or lower, I guess. rather.
Yeah.
But
it's weird that it made the top 10, but it did feel kind of like their token experimental artist this year. And I actually love him, but this record I found like a little ordinary or something. I don't know why, it just didn't really click with me.
Yeah, it's not my favorite of his, but I did enjoy it. Everything else just sort of like, you know, we talked about Lana Del Rey. FKA Twigs, I thought it was okay. You know, it was fine to listen to.
I thought that was such a drag. Did you listen to this, Darin?
I did not, actually.
It's so boring to me. I cannot get it. Like, I don't know. I find this actually... It's like a theme here because...
Well, that's how I felt about Big Thief.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just didn't think it was that interesting. I didn't know.
Or the other record of theirs this year. You know,
Yeah,
they released
right.
2 and everybody loves both of them.
So, like, I don't know what the deal... Like, it's weird because, like, Lana Del Rey, I mentioned I like it, but I get so bored by the end. FK Twigs, I'm, like, basically immediately bored, and it just, like, never picks up. Big Thief, I find, like, very dull and boring. Angel Olsen, it's, like, so dramatic that I tire of it. You know... Even like Wise Blood, who I liked her last record a lot, but this was like so mellow and I just was getting so bored. And I was like, why is there like entire top 10 just boring fucking records? I don't know. I mean, it's just, I don't know. Any other thoughts on the list as a whole? Did it outrage you? Did you find it predictable or what?
I mean, it was sort of predictable. You know, Lana Del Rey obviously was going to be number 1 because it was like, I forget what number it was on the end of the decade list, but it was the highest 2019 record by far. You know, so I guess that sort of...
They were handing out some like high-ass scores this year for the first time in a long time.
Yeah.
Like over 9.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of, and I guess we'll talk about this, but, you know, this is sort of like the first year that in you know, since basically high school that I kind of didn't give a shit what Pitchfork was saying or picking or anything. Like, I don't know if I aged out or I patricianed out or what, but just for the most part, I did not have any like interest in this list or really what they were having to say this year.
Yeah, what do you think about?
Well, I mean, it's just a little discouraging because, like, you know, when I come to these lists, I sort of start from the beginning, and I mean, you know, a couple of these records on here I put on my list and I enjoyed them, but then, like, you know, Big Thief, I kind of had high expectations for. I mean, some of these I was just like, okay, like, well, I just didn't understand it. It really made me feel like I was like out of touch or something. But one thing I did want to mention, I mean, this was like the year of like Billie Eilish, and Billie Eilish, I think, was on the the top somewhere. I don't know where it was, but
yeah, even though they didn't give it like a particularly good score, it ended up at number 21.
I was pretty surprised, but I thought they would give it a higher score. But I mean, I liked the record. I thought it was fun. I think we talked about it a little bit on like a previous podcast or whatever. That's
another one actually. I revisited it on this. You know, I made this long ass drive to Florida as part of my holiday travels, and I was re-listening to a bunch of this stuff, and I forgot that it's like very fun. And then you remember like the last 3 tracks are the most boring shit in a row.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Such drags, and it's like. Again, I was thinking like, God damn, why is every record so fucking boring this year? But it's like admittedly a fun, you know, fine record, but damn, it like falls apart at the end. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't like really, I was actually surprised because it seemed like everybody commenting on this, you know, on Reddit and other places, there was less outrage about this list than there usually is. And it felt like they weren't really pulling as many stunts. And it felt just like very on brand for Pitchfork, which is like, basically pop, but any pop with like a slightly arty edge, you know. And I don't know, it just sort of had an air of like, well, I really don't hate the list, but like a lot of the albums on it, it's pretty boring. Some absent BNMs, Black Midi, very hyped new rock band, Young Thug, which they gave a BNM, Sunn, which you mentioned. I know that always like annoys us, right? When like they give, you know, they give records like not that great score, and then they it somehow ends up on the list, or vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, it is strange. I'll give them that, like, you know, it's okay to change your mind on things, and you know, I'm not 100% on how they, you know, do write the list. You know, I'm sure it's more of a democratic effort than, you know, an individual review or whatnot, but It is just like really strange, to leave something off that got like a pretty good, like the Young Thug record got a pretty good score. That Black Midi was really getting hyped. It doesn't surprise me like Sunn gets left off because they have that one guy who's like sort of reviews the experimental stuff, and if they take a vote, how many Pitchfork may have listened to it, so I'll forgive that one.
Yeah. Well, I think an interesting contrast is Rate Your Music's rankings of the albums of the year, which is compiled by the people on Rate Your Music. They rate and score everything. So Dan, could you Rate Your Music's top 10 of 2019?
Yeah. Number 10, Clipping, There Existed an Addiction to Blood. Number 9, Danny Brown, you know what I'm saying. 8, Black Midi with Schlagenheim. 7, Lana Del Rey, Norman fucking Rockwell. Number 6, Little Sims, Gray Area, JPEG Mafia, All My Heroes Are Cornballs at number 5. Number 4, FKA Twigs, Magdalene. Number 3, Freddie Gibbs and Madlib with Bandana. Wise Blood, Titanic Rising at number 2. And number 1 was Tyler, the Creator with Igor.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there are a couple of these that are worth talking about. Does it strike you as, I can't even decide if I'm like wrong about this, but it feels like extremely different, sort of, even though there's a little bit of overlap, like just extremely different from Pitchfork's list. And, do you agree with me? And like, what is that? Does that mean that like Pitchfork and its readers are getting farther and farther apart? Do you kind of have that feeling?
I sort of like I just kind of said, I find myself more in this Rate Your Music camp. I don't love all these records. In fact, I really hate one of them. But this is sort of like more seems on the mark for the year, like, yeah. I don't know. It seems like more to have its pulse on at least the people I know or in the places of the internet that I hang out. It's sort of like matches up with that a little more than Pitchfork's list. Like I don't really know anybody that's loving these Pitchfork top 10 records. Minus
what
a
do you
couple
think,
of them.
Darin?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. I think that having Tyler, the Creator, at number 1 and like nowhere on the top 10 of Pitchfork is pretty telling. I mean, I feel like over the years, Rate Your Music and Pitchfork have been at least somewhat like similar. You know what I mean? There's usually the token Pitchfork pick or two that just kind of really seems to mess up the entire list. But this seems pretty like wildly different, I would almost say.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that maybe I never really noticed it, but I feel like that's maybe been happening more and more as the years have gone by. I would actually be curious to check that out. And I do think that's a product of like Pitchfork's decade, which we talked a little bit about in our, 2010s wrap up, where it's sort of moved into that, like it's moved into pretty much pure pop, even though they kind of stick with like the pop that they could make a case is like a little artier. And their readership, I think, is just they've just sort of gone into like the more clickbaity world where they're hoping for sort of like quick clicks from Facebook or whatever, Google results. And the hardcore readers that used to be there, I find that people are a lot like you, Dan, where I'm just like noticing that people say, well, I don't really go to Pitchfork anymore. I go to Rate Your Music for recommendations. And, which in itself creates sort of a weird, there's something weird about that since the people are deciding and then also reading. It's like a circular kind of thing. But I don't know. I just thought that it really jumped out at me this year, how much difference there was. Any records on this list? You guys have any thoughts about? Did you guys like Igor? I thought it was, pretty cool. But I wish he would rap. I love his rapping.
Yeah, it's like a record I didn't mind, and I think I liked it more than the last couple records of his. But yeah, I wish he would rap. I don't love it.
Yeah, I didn't actually check that one out, but I thought you actually liked it a lot, Gabe. I thought you were going to have it on your list.
I liked it a lot. I listened to it a lot, but it's sort of like it just felt like a fun kind of like summer record or something, and it was just like cool production. But it was just like, it actually annoys me a little bit how instead of like rapping, he would like sometimes he would actually rap, but it would be like his voice would be like so affected and like buried, like as if he didn't want to be front and center. And it's like he was like purposely just avoiding like, being there in the middle. And I love Flower Boy a lot, but I even felt there that I wish he was like a little more present and not just relying on the production. So But I will say that it was the kind of record where, and actually all the records that made my list were this way, where it was like, I listened to it for the first time and I had to like immediately listen to it again because I thought it was like such an interesting new sound kind of. I do want to shout out Bandana by Freddie Gibbs and Madlib, probably my favorite rap album of the year. I just think it's a masterpiece. You like that, Dan?
Yeah, I liked that record a lot. In fact, that was like number 7 or something. On the list. It was one that I bounced back. Maybe would have made the top 5. It's a great record. I mean, Freddie Gibbs is just completely underrated and underappreciated. I think, even though the fans obviously love it.
Right.
I will say though, on this list, clipping that exists in Addiction to Blood, that may be the corniest shit I've ever heard in my entire life. I was so stupid. I could not get past. It was like, I don't know, like some mall ninja shit or like neck beer. I don't know. It was awful. I hate their first record too.
I kind of liked it. I actually had never listened to them before, and I get what you're saying, but I thought it was like a little bit like tongue in cheek. It's kind of like using these horrorcore tropes, and like a lot of the sounds are very like horror soundtracky.
It felt like what I assume ICP sounds like. I've never heard anything but that Magnet song, but it's what I assume ICP is.
I thought it was pretty cool, and I'm like, I said this before, but any record that ends with 18 minutes of a piano burning is all right in my book. Darin, did you have any honorable mentions you wanted to shout out?
We didn't talk about the Tom York record on the list. I mean, I definitely enjoyed it. Unfortunately I didn't really like come back to it all that often. I checked out the J-Som record, and I really, really loved her, but just couldn't really get into that record. We didn't talk about Tool, even though I felt like all 3 of us liked it.
True.
On our fucking list. Damn it!
I'm glad you brought that up. I felt like we had sort of talked about in our end of the decade like episode. We talked about like albums that got like memory hold, and I feel like Tool sort of did that. Everybody was like really stoked when it came out and was like, oh, Tool it's like actually pretty good and stuff. I haven't listened to that record or even thought about it since we finished recording that podcast. And I really did I like legitimately was enjoying it for a bit, but I think like maybe it was just like, I don't know, nostalgia or like really wanting.
No, we've aged out. I think let's just admit it to ourselves. I think
I think you're right, but that was like sort of something that surprising. Like I didn't see it really pop up on many end of the year lists,
no.
Or if any. I can't remember if it was.
It might have been. We've talked about this before, where it's like you're just so surprised that it like is actually pretty good.
Yeah, that it wasn't just straight
like,
garbage. Yeah,
you like think it's better than it actually is, but then I didn't find myself really returning to it at all. Beyond that initial delightful surprise, the one record I really want to shout out, it was my number 6 album of the year, 100 Gex.
Oh god,
motherfucking amazing record. I know you hate it, Dan, but it is like it is so fucking awesome. It's like. I don't know. If you don't know, you just got to check it out. But it's like the most.
It sounds like that Crazy Frog shit from like
it's something
the early
like that.
2000s. It's so,
but it's
awful.
like the most insane, like I don't know, like Gen Z crazy shit. Like what it must. It's like what TikTok must look like to a boomer. What it's like just so discombobulating. And it's like the craziest like trap emo rap type of shit that's like, and it's just like 23 minutes of just a blast of like the crazy, it's like so exaggerated, like to the point where like it's like PC music kind of style, like over the top maximalism, but like cranked up like way higher. I think it's like a fucking masterpiece, honestly.
Save yourself the 23 minutes.
Check that out, Darin, and report back to me. So we talked a little bit about how it's interesting how Pitchfork's list and Rate Your Music's list are so different, and you mentioned this, Dan, as well, and I really strongly agree that I kind of feel like, I don't know if it's just me or if it's everybody, but for me it felt like 2019 was like finally, and we declare this every year, so who knows, but like the collapse of the Pitchfork like hegemony, where they're no longer really like the leading voice, and it was like, you know, there were so many lists like being posted on Reddit and stuff, like end of the year lists, end of the decade lists, and it just sort of felt like Pitchfork was one of many, you know, for the first time.
Yeah.
And I found myself, you know, in 2019 kind of like just looking elsewhere, looking lots of different places. And it's like I had been doing that sort of my whole life, but it was kind of like there was always Pitchfork. You check out everything at Pitchfork B&Ms, and then you look around on the margins to find like interesting stuff that they're not covering. But this time it just felt like, you know, Pitchfork B&Ming something just meant like nothing to me. It was like I was only looking elsewhere. Did you kind of feel like Pitchfork carried less weight than ever this year, Darin?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue kind of like what you sort of hinted at, that it's kind of been a trend. You know, there was definitely a time where I felt like I would come to Pitchfork and look at the B&Ms and could just trust that like they were going to be at least decent enough and worthy of my time. You know what I mean? Like there was definitely a time where it was heavily influencing my music taste. And that's just kind of like shifted, right? Because, and I think the most telling year was the year we did the Metaphor podcast, where we were like reviewing every B&M that
I know we really fucked up.
It really kind of revealed itself that like, God damn, like a lot of these B&Ms are they're not great. Like I'm actually like hating having to listen to this. And, you know, it's a bit of a letdown because like you just, you know, at least for us, and it's so hard to like find other people to like really relate with like growing up with Pitchfork. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of a letdown because like you just relied on it for so long, and now, I mean, there's other sources obviously to turn towards, but like I don't know, I just felt like Pitchfork was like you could always rely on it, at least at one point, you know.
No, exactly.
I think you could, and it was also really nice to have like sort of this, like, love it or hate it, there was kind of like this centerpiece to culture, and everybody, you know, whatever they would B&M or hype up, everybody had an opinion on it. You know, like you needed to check it out and form some opinion because this is what everybody's going to be talking about. And like, it just feels like, I feel strongly that 2019 was sort of significant in that, like, for the first time, like this whole scene or whatever is just without an anchor. You know what I mean, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, it's like definitely like very fractured, you know, like,
yeah.
I mean, for my whole, you know, since high school or whatever, like Pitchfork was always, like you said, like the sort of anchor, like everybody on whatever music forum I was hanging out at the time, you know, Yahtzee or something like that, everybody, you know, had this like similar thing in common. You know, everybody's listening to what they were talking about. Those B&Ms were always like sort of like at least must check out kind of things. And I feel like this year, this has to be the first year since like whatever that I've barely listened to like any of those B&Ms. Like, you know, basically the ones that are in the top 10 of the list. You know, I listen to those mostly just for this podcast. But the you know, before the podcast and everything, like I wanted to check out like most B&Ms, you know, I mean, every now and then there'd be something that I'd read the review and I could tell it wasn't for me. So, you know, maybe I'd skip it, but it was always like this culture. I mean, I used to stay up every night, like here where I live, like at 1 a.m. is when the new Pitchfork reviews come out. I used to stay up every night, check, you know, Pitchfork right at 1. If it was something, I remember like hanging out on like Mew and being like, oh, it's tonight the night they're going to review, you know, whatever big record.
What are they going to give it?
You know, and people arguing. And you remember there was always those threads like, it's Pitchfork time, or, you know, with the clock thing. And stuff. Like those were like fun, you know, like I have like fond memories of doing that. And I mean, I don't really go on Mew much anymore. But I just feel like nobody really cared. Like nobody's like waiting. I mean, today, like, you know, it started slipping. You know, I stopped checking it at 1, but I would, you know, first thing when I got to work, I'd usually check Pitchfork. Today, I even thought about, you know, because I was thinking about this podcast and stuff. The first time I checked Pitchfork today was after lunch, and I was like, you know, that 18-year-old Dan, you know, would be ashamed of myself, you know, or something. and even honestly, a lot of weekends and stuff, I just will completely, you know, forget. And then like Monday I'll go back and see, you know, I still like sort of check it just because, you know, I like to stay abreast with what's going on. But it has like very much become not like an important part of my life anymore.
I know. And it's weird because it's like, I don't know. I find that it's hard to discuss music and stuff, but I'm always looking for like people talking about, you know, a new release or something. And, you know, it's weird because sometimes like Pitchfork will BNM something, I'll give it like a listen and I'll be like, damn, this shit sucks. Like, you know, are there people who like it, or does everybody think it sucks, or what? And I can't even find anybody like talking about it at all. Like not on 4chan, not on Reddit. Like just there's no thread about it. Like nobody is, you know, it just got a BNM for Pitchfork.
Yeah,
I can't believe there's no thread. There's nobody even talking about it.
Crazy.
And yeah, and so, and it's sort of sad because there's nowhere to discuss these kind of things. But I do feel like, you know, and sort of talking about like, was 2019 a good year in music? I think it was pretty great actually for me to like branch out so much and just be completely untethered and just be sort of like searching many sources and, you know, just checking out lots of things and, you know, just discovering a bunch of things that are like so far off of Pitchfork's current radar. You know, it was like really fun and refreshing. You know, I've always been doing it, but it was like this year it just really felt like I was on my own. You know, I'd moved out of my parents' house for the first time or something. And I really enjoyed it. I do want to say though that I feel like this year it started extremely slow. It feels like nothing came out until like July. Did you feel that way, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of thought it like stayed kind of a bad year. You know, like the only like 2 records that I think are like what I'll consider, you know, classics that I'll like definitely listen to for a long time, and not just because, you know, like I'll probably keep listening to Swans and Sunn just because they're 2 bands I love, and you know I go through their discography every now and then. But like Purple Mountains and Nick Cave are like the only ones that I think are like great records that I'll keep in the bank. And I don't think it was like because Pitchfork or anything, you know, like I searched out, I spent a lot of time like with the Wire's end of the year list. I really enjoy them. You know, their end of the year list is generally, you know, it's 50 records long, and usually I didn't know 40 of them, or, you know, maybe 45. Right. And so I like really the past couple years, like have enjoyed like going through that 50 list, and you know, last year like I found a bunch of stuff I had never heard of. This year I really liked the like Kaylee Malone Sacrificial Code like drone record. I really liked Matana Roberts' Coin Chapter 4. But those are sort of the only ones I came away from in the Wire list that I made. I haven't finished all 50 yet, but I've come pretty close. A lot of them I liked, you know, I thought they're pretty good and stuff, but like those 2 are sort of like the only ones that maybe would have, you know, made my list or something, you know, like I don't know, it just felt like, I don't know, like kind of an off year. And another thing, a lot of like some of my favorite artists, and we should probably mention, like Kanye released a record this year, and nobody even like. Ooh. This is the first time we've even mentioned it.
Yeah, almost made it to the end.
Almost. You know, like this is a year. A handful of like some of my favorite artists, Kanye, Young Thug, Angel Olsen, like made records that I like just didn't really love or didn't think were that great. You know, like the Thug record I thought was good. It was fun. I didn't think, you know, I don't think it stood up to like Slime Season series or definitely not Barter 6 or anything. You know, I sort of felt like that with a lot of things. Like a lot of people just were sort of cranking out an all right record, a good record.
I guess that's true.
It's kind of a year of like, okay. It was okay.
I don't know. I really felt like by the end that it was a
Lightning
pretty great
Bolt was
year.
Another one.
I love that Lightning Bolt record. I don't know why you don't. But there are like at least 20 records that I would call like fucking awesome. But they took a long ass time to come out, honestly, and it sort of like annoyed me. I hope that's not a trend. You know how like I can't stand like movies, you know, because nothing comes out until like November, and then they all come out, and you don't have time to like see all the ones you want to see, and then it's over for the next like 11 months. So I hope that music doesn't start to get like backloaded for list reasons, stuff like that. But you know, I think there were like so many records that I think were just so awesome, but you know, again, I think it was because I was like branching out so much. It's weird, you know, because I'm like looking at like Rate Your Music, right? Like this Dax Pierson album it's got like 11 ratings on Rate Your Music, and one of them is me. And you know, and you just feel like isolated. Like you wish that there was some way to talk about music, or somebody writing about cool music that everybody was talking about. I'm going to miss those days, but I think they're over. What do you think about 2019, Darin?
You know, admittedly, I didn't get to like listen as much as I would have liked to, just overall, but I definitely checked out a lot of stuff, and unfortunately, I didn't really like. There's a lot of things that just kind of immediately, I don't want to just say bored me, but it just didn't like interest me right away. You know what I mean? And I think to Dan's point, like, you know, like, hey, I mean, there were some like artists, you know, Kanye West being one of them, that released something this year, and I just wasn't feeling it. You know what I mean? So it's not entirely like the sort of, you know, attention that Pitchfork gives it, but it's also the quality of the music, and just something wasn't quite as great for a lot of the records that I had hoped for. I mentioned J-Som earlier, even Big Thief. I mean, I liked Big Thief back when we talked about them on the podcast and stuff. It just wasn't a great year, I think, in terms of quality.
Well, I think we talked about this a little bit on our end of the decade pod, but you know, do you have any hopes for 2020? You know, do you feel like we're gonna? I mean, we mentioned like a lot of people, a lot of tried and true leaders of music, sort of failing a little bit, or just releasing letdowns of albums this year. Maybe the old guard is sort of receding. The 2010s are officially over. It's time for some new blood. I don't know what's in store for 2020 in the world of music.
Well, I hope Kanye gets out of his Jesus phase. Definitely. I don't know. I'm excited. You know, like we've talked about this, I think, off air. Like, you know, trap music has been like the big voice of the last like handful of years, maybe most of the decade. And I feel it waning, you know, so I'm really excited to see what takes its place, you know, what comes next for rap and just, you know, music in general, you know, popular music in general. I don't know. I look forward to the fracturedness, like is bad in one sense, that like it makes discussion harder and everything, but it also like I feel like there's easier access and easier like knowledge with like Rate Your Music and stuff, of like finding good experimental records, you know, like maybe not having to wait until the end of the year, like for the Wires list, you know, to find like this good trove of it now, you know, like with, you know, Pitchfork, you go on it, you see the 5 reviews for the day or whatever, but like a Rate Your Music, you know, you can go and you can say, show me the best experimental records for the year, or you know the best jazz record, you know, you don't have to just listen to the one token Pitchfork jazz record, you know, or whatever. So I think like the fracturedness like maybe will end up working like for, you know, like to be a positive, and I hope it does at least.
I think it might actually be, you know, it's going to be weird, because I think, you know, all signs point to Pitchfork is supposed to go behind a paywall at some point pretty soon here.
That will just be suicide. You know.
I thought it was going to be by the end of last year, but now I'm hearing it sometime this year. But basically, I think there's going to be a big vacuum. There's going to be like a huge fracturing, but maybe, just maybe, you know, there will be like a rise of some new voices, or there will be some like new sort of anchor for people to latch onto, or something like that. You got any hopes, Darin?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Dan. Hopefully Kanye turns things around. I mean, I think his. No, I mean, honestly, it's not just him. Like, I think he has a major influence over a lot of other artists, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And if it's not him, then hopefully there is somebody else who kind of like, you know, steers the ship in a new direction for the rest of the 2020s. You know, I want something to like really excite me. Like, as much as I love, you know, a band like Vampire Weekend releasing a record, you know, I don't want to just keep talking about the same bands that I listened to all throughout the 2010s. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Certainly.
Yeah. And it doesn't feel like Vampire Weekend is going to like, you know, revolutionize music and like start reverberations throughout the world of music, you know, like those days are over.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That time is kind of already passed. You know what I mean? Same with like a Radiohead record. I mean, if a Radiohead record came out, of course I'd listen to it, but like the days of Kid A and OK Computer. I mean, that's long past. So I don't know. Just something different to, shake things up, even if it feels like something that I've heard before, like just having a new band kind of take that spot,
I just think it's like really, I think we are not alone, but it's just bizarre to be thinking like, I hope that everything changes, like that's how we're ending the year. That's how we're ending the decade. Like, please, for the love of God, let it not be the way it is. You know what I mean? Like in 1999, nobody was saying that. They had like, Flaming Lips and Radiohead and Beck and Bjork and stuff. And they were probably like, damn, let's keep riding this fucking wave, but like, I don't know. I guess I have a feeling the whole music world is like, come on, let's do something else now.
All right. Well, what do you think? We'd love to read your thoughts on the air. Email us, popshieldpod@gmail.com. And we got a lot of emails while we were away. We'll get to some of those next episode. And speaking of next episode, as usual, we're not sure what we're doing yet. But check like Instagram, Twitter, maybe Facebook. I'm bad about posting there. And we'll try to let you know once we know. So if you like the show, help us out by subscribing. Leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Stay connected, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. All that is at PopShieldPod. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See ya.
So long.